afternoon and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation. Today's presentation is a SWOT analysis of the Office of Air and Radiation. This is the office under the Environmental Protection Agency, and let's go ahead and get started. The Office of Air and Radiation, as mentioned, is under the Environmental Protection Agency, which the EPA was created by executive order of former President Nixon in 1970 for the purpose of protecting human health and the environment. The Office of Air and Radiation specifically deals with national programs and policies that regulate indoor and outdoor air quality, pollution from vehicles and factories, atmospheric ozone levels, climate change and greenhouse gases, radon, and radiation protection. Three major laws that the OAR is responsible for administering and making sure that the American public is compliant with includes the Clean Air Act, the Atomic Energy Act, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Land Withdrawal Act. Alright, so the purpose of this presentation is to basically outline our SWOT analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the Office of Air and Radiation from the point of focus of specifically the Clean Air Act and the OAR's responsibility in the administration and regulation of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act limits toxic emissions into the air by both industry and vehicles, and so the OAR and its enforcement of the Clean Air Act will be our focus of our SWOT analysis. And this analysis will be conducted from the perspective of American citizens, so from the perspective of public opinion, and that public opinion is important because it provides feedback on how well the OAR is meeting the needs of the public both in the private and business sectors. So let's go ahead and get started and start with the strengths. So the OAR and the Clean Air Act has numerous benefits for the American public, specifically when it regards to healthcare costs. So the Clean Air Act since 1970 has improved human health and welfare, which has led to longer lives and significant savings. And those economic benefits, according to a study by the EPA, found that the Clean Air Act amounted to an average of $22.2 trillion since when it was first created in 1970 to 1990. And further, since 1970, this improvement in the human health and welfare has led to longer lives and a significant savings, as mentioned, in the reduced healthcare expenses and increased work efficiency. So now let's talk about the weaknesses of the OAR and its, specifically the administration of the Clean Air Act. So the Office of Air and Radiation's enforcement of the Clean Air Act is unfortunately constantly being challenged in the court systems due to improper administration of the law. So the public has seen that the EPA and the Office of Air and Radiation tries to skirt its authority sometimes, and so several court cases have been brought against the EPA over and over again. One in particular, Massachusetts versus the EPA, was in regards to the EPA trying to basically not take responsibility for regulation of carbon dioxide emissions from motor vehicles. And so the courts were actually ruling against the EPA, saying that the EPA did have authority to regulate greenhouse gases and that their avoidance of greenhouse gas regulation was arbitrary. So a reoccurring criticism of the agency and the inability of the OAR to account for cost and authority in regards to regulating and administering these laws has been a huge focus and a weakness of the OAR. These high costs for businesses include the appraised cost of complying with the statute standards, which according to a study was around $500 billion. And these costly changes must be made in the operations of many manufacturing plants, including technology upgrades, in order to limit toxic emissions into the air. So these changes eat into the profits of these companies, and the effects are that often, in order to cut costs in other areas, jobs are lost or outsourced to cheaper labor countries. This creates a negative press when it affects the local economies and the local job market. Opportunities. So climate change is on the forefront of a lot of literature and research nowadays. So the EPA and the Office of Air and Radiation really have an opportunity to make a significant impact in this area as well and reduce the effects of the U.S. emitted greenhouse gases if they focus a lot of their attention more on the middle and large-sized companies and create programs in which perhaps financial aid or loans are given out in order for these companies to comply with the standards of the Clean Air Act and increase the ability to have the technology available to them in order to comply to these standards. And lastly, the threats. So President Donald Trump and his administration, as well as some controversy over this climate change and skeptics of climate change, present the two greatest threats to the EPA and the Office of Air and Radiation. President Trump's administration has presented a proposal for major cuts of non-military spending, including targets against the Environmental Protection Agency, in which their budget currently of $8.1 billion would be reduced by approximately 20%, and that would include a reduction in staff and the elimination of dozens of programs, including ones under the Office of Air and Radiation. And so these skeptics of climate change present both negative PR for the Office of Air and Radiation and a decrease in compliance. So in conclusion, we've talked about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the Office of Air and Radiation, specifically its enactment of the Clean Air Act, regulation, and policies. And let's remember that from this public opinion standpoint, public opinion does tend to change over time. So with new administrations and new presidents, we tend to change our view on things. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation from a public opinion perspective, and have you look through the references. Have a great day.